Some monitors are just a little bit extraordinary and cool, and this monitor is no exception. This right here is Philips 49B2U6903CH. It's a curved monitor with the width of two 27-inch monitors with a 1440p resolution. This also makes it extremely wide, but in theory a great replacement to having two monitors side by side to get the job done. But this is not everything that hides beneath the surface of this monitor. Because apart from that, it also has a 5 megapixel built-in webcam on top of the display, which can be popped out simply by applying a little bit of pressure down and releasing. It has a little bit of wiggle room to tilt up and down, and then it also comes with Windows Hello and an AI tracking feature that can keep you in the middle of the frame all the time, which can be extremely useful for business meetings. The design is super minimalistic with no crazy RGB lighting, which is phenomenal in my opinion. The stand also has a very minimalistic approach, but it still seems rather sturdy and doesn't take up that much desk space. It also has the ability to tilt, swivel and just be adjusted in every which way you want to, which is always nice to see. The bezel in both the top left and right is relatively small, but the bottom one has a thick bezel of around double the size of the rest of the bezels. I don't particularly like that all that much. What I do like, however, is the way they've handled the cable management, especially the cable holder on the bottom base, which keeps cables really organized all the time, which is always nice to see. On the left side of the display, you also have 3 buttons made for business meetings. The light is for informing people around you that they can't interrupt you because you're in a meeting. The phone icon button is for taking calls, so if, for example, someone calls through Google Meet, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you'll be able to take the call with that button. And the last one is just for muting or unmuting your microphone, which is kinda nice. On the right side, you'll find the on-off button. Then you have the settings menu. The next button is for the KVM feature, which I'll talk about shortly. And the last 2 buttons are for the input and the image presets. In total, there's a single DisplayPort 1.4 input, 2 HDMI 2.0 inputs, and a Thunderbolt 4 or USB-C with 100 watt power delivery. Then you also get a USB hub or built-in docking station with 4 USB-A inputs. It also includes a Thunderbolt 4 and USB-C downstream of 15 watts, so having a Key 2 wireless charger connected shouldn't be a problem. And the ability to use the 5 megapixel webcam that's built in on the top. You also have a LAN port and an auxiliary port as well. So there's loads of ports. The KVM ability makes it possible to have more than one computer connected simultaneously. So as an example, you can connect your MacBook through the USB-C cable and have a desktop PC connected through the DisplayPort. And then they'll just be displayed side by side as if you had 2 monitors. The built-in webcam doesn't deliver the best image quality for sure, but it's still better than most webcams out there. So it's absolutely more than acceptable, and I don't mind using it for business meetings at all. The AI tracking features, however, isn't really the best. But then again, just using it stationary is great anyway, so I would probably just use it like this all the time, which actually also is what I'm doing. The size of the display feels kinda awkward since it goes so wide with just a small bend of a few degrees. I would have really wished that it bent a little bit more, since both the left and right side feels much more out of reach when sitting in the middle, which could have been more in reach if it just bent a little bit more. Another thing is that it feels kinda small on the top and the bottom, but that's probably mostly because I'm used to having 32-inch monitors, which is a bit taller. But you gotta keep that in mind when purchasing the monitor, because this can be a problem for some users. Multitasking is just working great with a monitor like this, because being able to resize the windows to your liking is absolutely amazing, because it's more than likely that you don't necessarily want a perfectly 50-50 layout. I at least almost never use a 50-50 layout. The image quality of the monitor is, however, gonna suffer a lot from having a VA panel, which is looking more like a TN panel rather than an IPS panel, which I'm normally used to. So it's kinda a big step down from an IPS panel, because the colors are way more washed out. But it can get quite a great level of brightness at 450 nits with SDR content and 500 nits with HDR content. So even in bright daylight from a window, it's quite fine. It's only HDR 400 on a VA panel, so the HDR content isn't gonna look the best, which is something you have to be aware of. On all the sites I've looked at where you can buy it, they have just mentioned that it offers 100 Hz. But when I went into the NVIDIA control panel, I actually noticed that it offered 120 Hz. So I thought, why not choose that? And to my surprise, there's been no issues at all, but I don't know if it's actually running at 120 Hz or 100 Hz because I really just can't tell. But this essentially means that it should run games relatively good, and after having tested it within Fortnite, I can conclude that it does run really great, but some things you have to be aware of if you intend to game with it is this. It doesn't have G-Sync or FreeSync, so there happens quite a lot of screen tearing, which can throw off your vision a lot of the time. It also has a 4 millisecond response time on paper, but I suspect that it's worse than that, since it kind of feels sluggish compared to the MSI QD OLED monitor, which I've borrowed from MSI, which has 0.003 millisecond response time. So coming from something like that, it's a huge gap. But when that's being said, having this wide of an FOV is kinda crazy when gaming, and it feels kinda cool actually. Just keep in mind that it'll be cropped off in competitive modes, so you don't have an advantage from other people, because the FOV increase is kind of a competitive edge, in my opinion. Some people complain about the stand being big, but I'm so used to gaming monitors, and that's somewhere you can complain about a big stand compared to the size of the monitor. So it's by no means bad in my opinion. And it's also relatively easy to place things on, since it's flat, so you can still use the surface area. It's also a good thing to note that to get the webcam to work when using an HDMI or DisplayPort cable, you need to connect a USB upstream cable to the unit. Otherwise, it simply won't work. This basically also goes for all the USB ports in the back, as well as the ports on the side of the monitor. I was a bit confused in the beginning as for why my webcam didn't work at all, and this was simply the reason. I came from an IPS panel, and after that I've borrowed a QD OLED panel, and here it kinda almost hurts my eyes just how washed out the colors on a VA panel is. But that has more to do with the fact that these other panels simply just look spectacular, so almost anything else would look horrible. But in general, having a VA panel on this expensive of a monitor almost seems like the biggest crime of this monitor in my opinion. My audio solution also works through a USB-A cable, but if you intend to connect headphones directly to your desktop PC through the auxiliary port, you'll realize that the position of the auxiliary port, which is in the side of the monitor, is really annoying. The better option would definitely have been to have it in the back, together with the rest of the ports. Minor inconvenience, but still annoying. The biggest gripe with this monitor is for sure the price, because it's really expensive compared to getting the same specification 27-inch 1440p monitors separately. And I particularly feel kinda sad that it doesn't offer an OLED panel like what the Samsung G9 does. But the Samsung G9 also doesn't offer the same features, so I guess it's fine. And it's also more for like gaming centric, where this is more for like business centric people. It's a very feature-rich display that'll work great for people who works in an office and do a lot of administration stuff and business meetings and stuff like that. I do also really like the built-in camera, especially the feature that it can be pushed in when it's not in use. It's super nice. And being able to place a window anywhere and resize it to odd sizes are absolutely amazing. But the biggest benefit for someone like me is being able to create a huge timeline for video editing. But I also have to be honest, the small benefits doesn't outweigh the downsides in my opinion. So I've loved the experience for a few weeks now, but I will go back to my two regular 32-inch IPS Dell monitors, because VA panel really doesn't do it for me. If it had a better panel, curved even more, and was bigger in both the top and the bottom, then I would have considered it. But I kind of feel like it still needs a little bit more for someone like me to switch to that kind of monitor. So as it stands right now, it simply doesn't work for my daily workflow. But I'm sure my boss would love it. Well, that was all I had for you today. As always, leave a like and subscribe if you want to see some more cool stuff. Apart from that, then I'm out.